It was supposed to be a celebration, a peaceful escape tucked away in the fall-drenched mountains of Vermont. A trip meant to mark the beginning of forever, just 1 year after two people stood at the altar, promising love, commitment, and trust. Joseph and EmilyFerlazzo had only been married for a year. Young, seemingly adventurous, and in love, or so it appeared from the outside. They had decided to celebrate their first anniversary with a quiet road trip, the kind of thing couples do to reconnect, recharge, and reflect on their journey together. No one could have guessed that this journey would end in horror. Amid the golden foliage and cool October breeze, something sinister brewed. What unfolded inside the confined walls of a camper van parked in the small town of Bolton, Vermont, would go on to shock the nation and leave a family broken forever. By the end of that trip, 22-year-old EmilyFerlazzo would be dead, murdered and dismembered by the very man she had trusted most. Her husband, Joseph, would be behind bars, facing life in prison. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of emotional loss of control, according to the evidence, and eventually Joseph's own confession. This was calculated, cold, methodical. What really happened inside that camper van? What drove Joseph Ferlazzo to commit such a monstrous act against his wife? And were there warning signs all along that everyone missed or ignored? Today, we're diving deep into the tragic and disturbing case of Joseph and EmilyFerlazzo, a tale of love, darkness, deception, and death. A case that reminds us how sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who appear the most ordinary. Joseph and EmilyFerlazzo met and married young. Like many modern couples, swept up in a whirlwind of affection, shared interests, and dreams of building a life together. Joseph, originally from New Hampshire, was quiet, reserved, and seemed like a mild-mannered guy to most who knew him. Emily, on the other hand, was full of life, kind-hearted, radiant, and deeply compassionate. She loved animals, worked with children, and was known for her warm, open spirit. To mark their first wedding anniversary, they set off on what was supposed to be a romantic retreat, a road trip from New Hampshire into the serene corners of Vermont. The plan was simple: drive through the scenic backroads, enjoy the beauty of autumn, and spend some time together in nature. Their vehicle choice? A converted camper van, a small, self-contained world where they could eat, sleep, and travel together. They arrived in Bolton, Vermont, a quiet, peaceful town known for its mountainous views and natural charm. The kind of place people go to disconnect from the world. They parked their van near a secluded spot, just off the beaten path, surrounded by woods and silence. To outsiders, it looked like a couple enjoying a well-earned break from everyday life. But inside that van, things were unraveling. According to friends and family, Joseph and Emily's relationship had always been complicated. Behind closed doors, there were signs of emotional turmoil, heated arguments, control issues, manipulation. People close to Emily noticed she had begun to withdraw in the months before the trip. She seemed anxious, even fearful at times. But like so many people in toxic relationships, she kept most of it to herself. No one wants to believe that someone they love might hurt them. And no one wants to believe that their relationship, even when rocky, could end in tragedy. Still, there were red flags. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. Emily had reportedly told friends that Joseph could be possessive. He didn't like when she went places alone. He questioned her about small things, who she was texting, where she was going. Over time, Emily's voice seemed quieter, her laughter less frequent, but she stayed. Whether out of hope, fear, or the idea that things might get better, she stayed. On the surface, though, the anniversary trip seemed normal. Photos posted online showed trees, smiles, and cozy moments. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building. It's often said that isolation can be dangerous in abusive relationships. And that camper van, just a few feet wide, was the ultimate form of isolation. No escape, no privacy, just two people, alone. We don't know exactly what triggered it. According to Joseph's later statements, an argument broke out in the early hours of the morning on October 13th, 2021. He claimed Emily was yelling at him. He claimed she hit him. And then, in what he described as a moment of panic, he grabbed a gun, but it wasn't panic, not according to the prosecutors. Not according to the confession. Joseph admitted that he shot her in the head twice. And what he did next was not the action of a frightened man, but a calculating one. He dismembered her body inside the camper van. And then he cleaned up, hid the evidence, packed up her remains in plastic bags and storage containers, and carried on as if nothing had happened. Emily's life had been stolen brutally, and her memory reduced to a cover story Joseph repeated with eerie calmness. He told her family that she had left after an argument, that she had walked off into the woods, disappeared, vanished. He drove to visit his sister and calmly explained that Emily was missing. No emotion, no concern. What he didn't know was that the truth would catch up with him quickly. Within 24 hours, Joseph would confess to murder. But that confession wouldn't bring closure. It wouldn't undo the horror of what had happened in that van. It would only mark the beginning of a legal battle, a media firestorm, and a lifetime of grief for Emily's family. The trip was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a crime scene, a symbol of how dangerous love can become when it's poisoned by control, obsession, and violence. October 13th, 2021. Inside the cramped quarters of a camper van parked in the quiet woods of Bolton, Vermont, a nightmare unfolded in silence. There were no screams heard, number 911 calls made, just a moment of sudden, irreversible violence. According to his own confession, Joseph Ferlazzo shot his wife, Emily, twice in the head as she sat inside the camper. The shots were point blank. There was no struggle, no attempt to run. She never stood a chance. In that instant, her life was stolen. The young woman who loved animals, who smiled wide in photographs, who had dreams and fears and plans, was gone. But what makes this case more horrifying isn't just a murder. It's what happened next. Joseph didn't run. He didn't break down. He didn't call for help or report the shooting or even show signs of panic. Instead, he slipped into something cold, mechanical, almost inhuman. Over the next several hours, Joseph Ferlazzo carried out a gruesome and deliberate act. He dismembered his wife's body. Using a handsaw he brought with him, he methodically cut apart her remains, placing the pieces in multiple plastic bags. Some were stuffed inside garbage bags, others placed in containers, all of them hidden in the same camper van they had once used as a symbol of freedom and intimacy. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, surgical, and planned. Joseph didn't panic or attempt to cover up the crime in haste. He cleaned up the scene. He packed up the bags. And when he was finished, he calmly drove away, leaving behind nothing but blood and silence. He didn't go into hiding. He didn't leave the state. Instead, Joseph drove to visit his sister. When asked where Emily was, he lied, told her they had gotten into an argument, and Emily had walked off into the woods. No emotion, no worry, just a story, rehearsed and repeated like a bad script. The next step in Joseph's twisted performance, he filed a missing persons report. Yes, the man who had murdered and mutilated his wife walked into a police station and pretended to be a concerned husband. He described her outfit, gave the last known location, told officers she may have wandered off. At the time, no one knew they were speaking to a killer. But it wouldn't take long before the truth started to surface. Because Joseph Ferlazzo, despite the careful cover-up, couldn't hide what he had done forever. It didn't take long for investigators to sense that something was off. When officers began asking questions, Joseph's story started to crack. His timeline was inconsistent. His tone was too calm. And most importantly, there was no evidence that Emily had ever walked off. No witnesses saw her. No items of hers were found in the woods. And when police reviewed surveillance footage from nearby stores, they noticed something disturbing. Joseph was seen shopping alone, even though he had told officers Emily was with him. The inconsistencies mounted, and when investigators asked Joseph for a formal interview, he agreed, likely thinking he could keep up the lie. But under the weight of questioning, something shifted. Less than 24 hours after he filed the missing person report, Joseph confessed. He told police everything. He admitted to shooting Emily inside the camper van. He admitted to dismembering her body. And perhaps most chillingly, he admitted to doing it all without much remorse. In a recorded interview, Joseph explained the steps he took after the murder, down to the tools he used, the order in which he did things, and even how he cleaned up afterward. He then led investigators back to the camper van, where they discovered the horrifying truth. Inside were the bags containing Emily's remains. Some were stored in a cabinet, others in a container under the bed. The camper had become a tomb. Authorities were stunned, not only by the brutality of the crime, but by the coldness in Joseph's demeanor. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shaken. He was matter-of-fact, like someone recounting a routine event, not a human tragedy. Joseph claimed he acted in self-defense. He said Emily was yelling, that she struck him, that she threatened him with a gun. But the evidence and investigators told a very different story. First, no gun was ever found in Emily's possession. There was no indication she had threatened him. In fact, Joseph was the only one with a weapon. The handgun used in the shooting was registered to him. Second, there were no signs of a struggle, no bruises, no defensive wounds on his body, and no blood trail suggesting a fight had taken place. Then came the most damning evidence of all, the meticulous way he handled the aftermath. From the dismemberment to the cleanup to the fake story he spun for family and police, everything pointed to premeditation. This wasn't a man who snapped in a moment of fear. This was a man who had been prepared to cover up what he had done. Detectives also discovered that Joseph had previously expressed violent tendencies. In earlier statements, Emily had allegedly confided to friends that she feared him, that he could be controlling, that he had a temper. These weren't random outbursts. These were red flags, warnings that, sadly, went unnoticed or unreported in time. After his confession, Joseph was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and while he would later plead not guilty in court, claiming mental health issues and self-defense, the facts of the case told a much darker truth. EmilyFerlazzo's life was taken not in a moment of chaos, but through a calculated, horrific act by someone she trusted. Her death sent shockwaves across the country, not just because of its brutality, but because it forced many to confront a terrifying question. How well do we really know the people closest to us? The wheels of justice turned slowly, but deliberately. More than 3 years after EmilyFerlazzo's life was taken in the quiet woods of Vermont, the case finally reached the courtroom. In December 2024, a Vermont jury assembled to hear the evidence, to listen to facts, and ultimately decide the fate of Joseph Ferlazzo, the man who had confessed to killing and dismembering his wife in one of the most horrifying domestic cases the state had ever seen. The trial was intense but short, lasting only a week. Yet within those few days, the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming mix of sorrow, anger, and disbelief. Emily's family, sitting silently on the front bench, listened as prosecutors painted the picture they had dreaded for years. The last moment of Emily's life inside the camper van, and the cold-blooded dismemberment that followed. Photos from the crime scene were shown. Forensic experts explained in graphic detail how Emily's body was discovered, in bags sealed and stuffed inside the very place she thought was a getaway. A place that was meant to be a celebration of love had been turned into a chamber of death. The prosecution was clear in its argument. This was not self-defense. It was execution. They emphasized Joseph's lack of remorse, his disturbing level of calm after the killing, and the elaborate measures he took to cover up the crime. There was no evidence Emily had attacked him, no bruises on his body, no weapon in her possession, just Joseph's word, a word that had already been bent and twisted too many times. But the defense, holding on tightly to their only lifeline, continued to push the self-defense narrative. They argued that Joseph had long struggled with his mental health, that Emily had provoked him, that his actions were the result of panic, not premeditation. His lawyers described him as emotionally unstable, a man who snapped in a moment of fear, and then lost control of his actions afterward. But the jury saw something else. They saw a man who didn't just kill, he calculated. He moved his wife's lifeless body. He packed it in plastic bags. He cleaned up the mess. He visited family, and he filed a false report. All signs pointed control, not chaos. As closing arguments wrapped up, the courtroom fell into heavy silence. The air was thick with emotion, and when the jury returned with their verdict, the world seemed to stop for a moment. Joseph Ferlazzo was found guilty of first-degree murder. The decision was unanimous. Emily's mother, clutching a photo of her daughter, broke into tears. Friends and family hugged one another, a mix of relief and devastation washing over them. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring Emily back. The judge delivered a mandatory sentence, 35 years to life in prison. Joseph Ferlazzo will spend the majority, if not all, of his remaining years behind bars. Even after the courtroom emptied, the echoes of EmilyFerlazzo's story lingered, not just in Vermont, but across the nation. Emily's family described her as a beautiful, kind-hearted soul. She had a deep love for animals. She worked with horses. She volunteered with rescues. She wanted to open her own animal sanctuary one day, a dream that now lives only in memory. In the weeks after her death, friends and strangers alike gathered in her hometown for a candlelight vigil. Hundreds stood silently under the autumn sky, holding candles in the dark. Some whispered prayers. Others cried softly. A few shared stories of her laugh, her warmth, her ability to make anyone feel welcome. Her mother, speaking through tears, said something that struck everyone. Emily deserved so much more than this. She had so much life left to live, so much love left to give. And it's true, her life, so full of potential, was cut short in the cruelest of ways. But in the wake of her tragedy, something began to shift. Emily's case became more than a headline. It became a conversation, one that cut through the silence surrounding domestic violence. People began to talk about the warning signs, the red flags, the subtle manipulation that can escalate over time, about how emotional abuse is often invisible until it isn't. Her story became a rallying cry for change. Advocates and support groups used her case to spotlight the hidden epidemic of domestic abuse in America. They spoke of how partners can be charming in public, but controlling behind closed doors. How many victims stay silent out of fear, or love, or hope that things will change? Emily's friends have since started a small foundation in her name to raise awareness, provide resources to those in toxic relationships, and offer safe spaces for women who feel trapped. Her memory lives on, not in the way we would have wanted, but in a way that continues to help others. Her story reminds us, domestic violence doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like silence, like isolation, like fear hidden behind a smile. And sometimes, tragically, it ends in murder. The story of Joseph and EmilyFerlazzo is more than a crime story. It's a devastating example of how love, when poisoned by control and violence, can become fatal. It's a story about a woman who never got to live the life she dreamed of, a woman who loved deeply, but was betrayed in the worst way possible. And it's a story about the importance of speaking out, of noticing the signs, asking the hard questions, and offering help when it's needed most. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, whether it's emotional, verbal, physical, or otherwise, please don't stay silent. Talk to someone. Reach out to a counselor, a friend, a hotline. There are people who care, people who will listen, people who can help, because the truth is, lives depend on it. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing real stories that matter. This has been Crimes, Culprits and Cases, and I'll see you in the next one.